Thank you very much indeed. And I have to say that whenever I hear the Right Honourable the Baroness, I sort of look over my shoulder and go and say, where is she? I'm just glad if someone can pronounce Gisela. So that's your challenge for today. And just as an aside, the only time Tony Blair managed to pronounce it properly is when he sacked me. So they were very clear. Small compensations. I'm grateful that you asked me to be here, and also for bringing back some memories of the first composite meeting I've ever attended. And I'm glad I'm here as the first Civil Service Commissioner today. I also want to say that this is my first public speech since starting the job, so I think it's clear evidence that your General Secretary has got his finger on the pulse and makes sure that you're up to date and we keep in touch. And I was about to sort of say, my past as a politician and a party politician, and again, your debate reminded me of what brought me into politics in the first time. It was research into discretionary investment powers of trustees in pension funds, and that was at the time when nobody knew who owned the surpluses in pension funds, and there were all the court cases. And then the more I looked into it, the more I realized that the one group who was totally disadvantaged were women, because as long as pension contributions were based on taxable pay, if you were in low income, there was no way you could actually increase this. And SERPs at that stage also discriminate against women, because those last 5 years of retirement age, you got disproportionately more. And so I ended up saying, well, the only way you can change is when you change the law. So in a sense, I've done a slight full circle. I did the law, and I've now gone as working with the civil service. And I just want to say that because I've been a politician before, I have experienced firsthand the importance of being able to rely on civil servants, to trust their advice, the continuity and their impartiality. And whilst there hasn't been a politician, former politician, in the role of first Civil Service Commissioner, I think for over 100 years, I think we should be aware that unless we understand the pressures on each other, we will not be able to find common solutions. I'd also want to just make an observation, and that is there are no universal laws on how to run a society. And democracy is a system of trial and error. And we are continually trying to find partial solutions to recurring problems. And I just want to give you one example, because I'm old enough to have been through 3 fuel crises. The first one was when I first arrived in the UK in 1973-74. We didn't have enough electricity production capacity because there wasn't sufficient coal being mined. The second one was in 1999 when the supply chain broke down. And then the third one was arguably because we had enough supplies, but there was a panic breakout and the fuel wasn't in the right places. The reason why this is important is that all 3 crises had different causes, but there were really common solutions to the problems, and more importantly, there were common pitfalls to be avoided. And that is one of the reasons why politicians bring the impatience of the moment. They want things done today, and they look over their shoulders because there is a next reshuffle or a next election. But that is the very moment when you need a civil servants who tend to be more cautious. They provide a collective and enduring memory, and it has impartiality of their advice. And both groups entered the professions because they're committed to public service. And the tensions which arise in those relationships are actually part of the essential checks and balances of a functioning democracy. However, and there's one big difference, and you're addressing this today, politicians can answer back when they feel they have been unfairly attacked and criticized. Civil servants can't. And if they do, it's usually a resigning matter. And you have to rely on others to make your case and to defend your professional integrity. And I know the FDA has done that, and I know that other trade unions have spoken up, and I'm glad they've done so. But I do think that we should all speak up when we see integrity and professionalism being undermined. And can I also say that, to my mind, briefings and anonymous attacks, they're not just wrong, they're also counterproductive. They actually prevent people who want to join the civil service and want to work for government, they prevent them from wanting to be part of that system. So, as my job is helping the civil service attract and recruit people, and with the skills and abilities which are needed, and that is done on merit, and that is the core of our role, I do think that both inside the civil service and outside, we respect and celebrate that professionalism. Now, if you were to ask yourself, what does the Civil Service Commission do? I think it's a legitimate question. And some of you may have not come across us before at all. The Commission, as well as the Civil Service, have as their foundation document a report published in 1854. The Northcote-Trevelyan report talked about a British civil service with the core values of integrity, propriety, objectivity, and appointment on merit, able to transfer its loyalty and expertise from one elected government to the next. It recommended that entry to the civil service be solely on merit, to be enforced through the use of examination. And these are still the core functions today. We regulate the entry into the civil service, albeit it's now on a statutory basis. It is the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act of 2010, which has put the Commission on a statutory basis. It is actually a very thoughtful piece of legislation because it defines boundaries and powers, but it leaves room for evolutionary development. For example, there's a statutory duty to have a civil service code, but does not define what the code should contain. As the first Civil Service Commissioner, I lead the board of 11 commissioners who regulate appointments into the civil service. We're all appointed by Her Majesty the Queen, and we serve a 5-year non-renewable term. Our titles may have a touch of Gilbert and Sullivan about them, but the concept of 11 diverse individuals with senior experience of the private, public, and voluntary sector, providing a public assurance that appointments are made fairly, is a sound and actually an entirely modern one. Our key interest is that anyone joining is appointed fairly and on merit, not based on patronage or nepotism, which was a driving force behind the establishment of the Commission following Northcote-Trevelyan. The Commission's logo on an advertisement for a civil service job tells you that the competition will be regulated in line with the statutory requirement of merit after fair and open competition. The Commission's recruitment principles set out what it means in practice, and they are intentionally principles and not narrow rules. The Commission has a second role as the independent appeal body for civil servants making a complaint under the Civil Service Code. We help departments promote the civil service values of impartiality, objectivity, honesty, and integrity. Some may have come across the Commission either through its recruitment exercise or because a panel has been chaired in a senior competition. Today, I'd like to talk to you about how we as a regulator want to support, enable, challenge, and celebrate the work of the civil service, to deliver the government's priorities, and even more so at a time of major national and global challenges. The civil service must continually bring in, as well as train and retain, people with the relevant skills and experience. In some departments, this requires more emphasis on policy than delivery, but the two should never be separated. Deliverability has to be a core element of good policy. The civil service exists for a purpose, and the concept of an impartial, permanent civil service relies on a workforce that is able to face new challenges. It is what Gus O'Donnell once coined as the 4 Ps: passion, pace, professionalism, and pride. Some of the skills required may never be found within the permanent civil service. I'm thinking of the role of Chief Medical Officer, Chief Scientific Officer, and a number of the new openings which are emerging at the moment around nuclear energy. Others may only be needed for a short period and for very specific purposes. Developing vaccines and managing large-scale supply chains in response to lockdown and the pandemic come to mind. At the top level, we need the ability to use data, not just to justify existing policies, but to anticipate where policy interventions may be needed in the future. The public we serve expects fast and responsive service delivery. Every one of us, when we're not in our professional capacity, would not be at least bit surprised by the sentence. No one doubts the need for continuing reform and the ability to adapt and respond to changing circumstances. But I think we do tend to diverge when it comes to pace and scope. The government's 2021 declaration on reform is a shared document between ministers and the civil service leadership. This is important to us and the Commission. Effective government relies on working together in the public interest. It calls for greater porosity and commits to relocating civil service jobs away from Whitehall and London and into all the regions and cities of the United Kingdom to support levelling up. This brings new challenges, as do changes in working arrangements and the use of technology. So how can we support you? I think first and foremost we can support you by just doing our job well, by providing assurance that recruitment into the civil service is done fairly and openly, and appointments are on merit. At the lower levels, recruitment is delegated to departments, and my team audit their practice annually. Broadly speaking, compliance with the recruitment principles is pretty good, but we intend to put greater focus on persistent poor performance. As a regulator, we don't have the power to sanction, but we can make sure that our findings are taken seriously and that action is taken to improve performance. The annual performance review of permanent secretaries undertaken by the lead non-executive of the departmental board. In future, we have agreed with lead NEDs that they will include the Commission in their list of stakeholders to be consulted. Each department's compliance and that feedback, which covers both performance under the recruitment principles and code complaints, will become part of their permanent secretary's own performance review. We are in the process of putting together our annual report, which will be laid before Parliament in the summer. In the last financial year, Commissioners personally chaired 242 competitions for the most senior roles, ensuring recruitment panels test candidates on their skills, their experience, they do so fairly and against criteria, and identify the best overall candidate for specific positions. Recruitment panels for senior roles will usually include a key stakeholder or sector representative, or a departmental non-executive, to ensure external input. Decisions about salary, terms and conditions, and location are for the department. Our interest is in making sure that all the candidates are treated fairly and compete on a level playing field. But there was a very good reason why I wanted to be here earlier on and just listen to some of the motions which you have brought, because I am not deaf to the concerns, but the Commission's role is on that principle. But I think we need to know what is being felt. And we also take very good care of the departments and recruiters get it right when they think about job specifications, how you describe the skills required, make sure the recruitment process is fair, and that there's a diverse field of people who apply. The government reform plan indicates that all senior civil service roles would become external by default, meaning that vacancies should be opened up to the wider employment market. I would expect a government announcement on how this might work in practice before too long. Up to now, the decisions whether or not to open up a role to external competition was done on a case-by-case basis by the departments, and some departments have already moved to that. On our experience of chairing selection processes, civil servants do well in external competitions, and regular testing of skills and capabilities can provide new and sometimes unexpected insights. As our role relates to recruitment into the civil service, external by default brings the Commission in to oversee substantially more recruitment competitions. We are clear that this should by no means mean that it will be light touch, but regulation, and particularly if the numbers increase, if it increases in a very important pipeline, then the Commission will need to respond and evolve its working model. We will want to see the data and hear from the departments and civil service HR about how they will achieve this and what they hope to see in terms of outcomes as we develop our regulatory model. Like many regulators, we will look to deploy most resources on recruitment practice that poses greatest risk. For example, where a department has high compliance scores, the Commission may be able to move on to earned autonomy. and some of the positions will fall into that category. We will be looking to pilot and test potential models as external by default takes shape in departments, but we will never lose sight of our statutory duty to ensure that selection is open, fair, and on merit. So how can we support you? The board actually constantly asks itself whether we are striking the right balance between our regulatory duties and our desire to be flexible and pragmatic. We want the civil service to innovate and experiment. The challenge comes alive when we are asked to approve exceptions to fair and open recruitment for specific reasons and for time-limited periods. Departments tend to ask for them because they need to respond to an urgent and often unexpected set of criteria. In recent years, the board has encouraged the use of exceptions to help the civil service meet its wide ambition to become more representative of the country and to give life chances to individuals from a range of disadvantaged backgrounds, such as care leavers, veterans, and ex-offenders. We strongly support the civil service's ambition to be more diverse, including diversity of background, region, thought, ethnicity, and gender. Internal measures such as talent development programs, temporary promotion, mentoring, are not within the Commission's remit. But with our unique perspective across departments' recruitment, from chairing open competitions at senior level and auditing processes across government, we're using our experience and influence to help departments deliver on their ambition to be more representative. Just recently, I sort of paused and reflected on the fact that the current cabinet is ethnically more diverse than the senior levels of the civil service. Dame Sharon White was the first black person to become a permanent secretary in 2013. Suma Chakrabarti served as Perm Sec in the Ministry of Justice from 2007 to 2012. I assumed things were beginning to change, but I don't think they have. And I do think that it isn't just enough for us to talk about the change, that each and every one of us has to contribute to bringing about that change. The Commission is beginning a pilot, initially with MOJ, for pathways to lead, to develop potential leaders with backgrounds and skills currently underrepresented in the workforce. And it's for time-limited appointment, who may be able to bring in new thinking and innovative answers to intractable policy problems. We will be reviewing this pilot to see if it has wide application. The successful going forward into employment exception scheme, which began as a pilot under Ian Watmore, my predecessor as first Civil Service Commissioner, is now offering over 1,000 roles as life chance opportunities to veterans, care leavers, and ex-offenders, and others. And this will now move into the Cabinet Office and with the Commission's ongoing support. So how do we challenge you? If you have not yet done so, I do encourage you to read the Commission's recruitment principles. Intentionally, as I said, they're principles and not narrow rules. They explain what we mean when we say open, fair, and on merit. During the pandemic, there was a surge in using exceptions for appointments, and that is not surprising. But we do need to get back to normal, make strategic decisions, and operate within the rules. We audit recruitment and highlight breaches because rules are important, but we also really want to encourage and support new ways of doing things. Hiring managers must think carefully about the skills and qualities they're looking for and spend time and effort to reach a strong and diverse field of candidates. Successful external candidates will need different kinds of support and induction than internal ones. Our recruitment processes take too long. We know that we lose talented candidates who either drop out or take on other roles. This is wasteful for those who have applied and dropped out, and for vacancy holders, if we don't get the best people into post. Together with departmental HR departments, the Commission will want to look at ways of shortening the time taken from decision to hire to someone being in the post. The Commission also hears appeals under the Civil Service Code. All civil servants should be familiar with the code, and new joiners need to have an awareness of the ethical expectations and the mechanisms in place to raise concerns. We hold online events and workshops and support departments' work, but embedding public service values is an ongoing task. It is never quite done. The primary responsibility for this lies within departments, as it is their duty to resolve complaints. We only hear appeals once all internal avenues have been exhausted. And the perfect outcome, from my point of view, would be where no complaints ever come to the Civil Service Commission because the departments have dealt with them. However, if they have to come to us, we are here, and we are here to help. The last 6 years have been particularly demanding and challenging, and it's right for us to celebrate the civil service. We in the Commission try to play our part in this celebration. We have recently launched the first Commissioner's Mark of Excellence to showcase some of the excellent recruitment practice out there. The award will recognize outstanding innovation and commitment in the recruitment of diverse candidates across all grades into the civil service. It champions diversity in its broadest sense, supports the government's priority of levelling up, as well as the civil service reform agenda of an innovative and skilled civil service. Along with the Cabinet Secretary, cross-government networks, and who are endorsing and supporting this award. The winner and those who are highly commended will be announced in July, and they will be entitled to use the Excellence Kite Mark in their advertising for a year. One of the great things about being a commissioner is that we have a unique perspective across Whitehall. We see the range of tough and demanding jobs which have to be filled. And wherever we look, we see commitment, determination, and a desire to do the right thing. There are changes ahead for both of us. There are changes ahead in working practices. There are changes ahead for us as a regulator. But I do think that as long as we all remember that this is a joint endeavour, that this is an endeavour in making democracy work, and it's a shared commitment, I'm absolutely convinced that we can do it. And I'm happy to take questions from you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the floor? Yeah, can you, and then I've forgotten your name in that row. Stephen in that row, yeah. And you've got one as well, yeah, okay. Okay, one at the back, right, okay.
Hello, Gisela. Jamie McIntosh from Mod Branch. My question is civil service investment in lifelong learning and continuous professional development adequate not only to recruitment but retention of talent for the challenges ahead?
I think there was a time when the civil service kind of prided itself on what Peter Hennessy called the good chap principle. I mean, the use of the word chap sort of already gives away on its time and place in history. But this notion, I think, that that as long as people are able and you put them in a place, they will finally find the way of doing it, is insufficient. I think we don't do enough in terms of the inductions. And one of the things which I think I was hinting at is that if you want what they call porosity, i.e. civil servants moving out into the sector and then coming back in again, or people from the outside coming in, then the continuous learning and the inductions, I think, actually has to respond to that. But in this fast-changing world, the biggest thing of investing in your workforce is to have it continuously trained, continuously upskilled. And I think that's why the government skills unit has an absolutely key role to play in making that happen. But also that kind of learning from each other, because I'm not someone who subscribes to the notion that one sector is better than another. I think usually the best practice is when sectors work together.
Thank you. I'm going to take one of the questions from Zoom, just so our online audience know that we're getting them and we're going to ask them, and maybe we'll get some more online as well, and then I'll come to you, Stephen, and then. So, encouraging a more representative SCS, do you have a view on making reasonable adjustments? Currently, disabled people applying for SCS roles are being forced through the same process as non-disabled candidates under the banner of following the process for all candidates.
It's actually a very interesting question, because when we were looking at the submissions for the merit awards, one of the things we were looking for is to what extent departments were putting forward what they do in that area. And what was remarkable to me as a newcomer is that some departments were mentioning things which they thought was really innovative, and those who've been around longer in the sector were saying, well, some of us have been doing this for 20 years, I would have expected them to do this. And others who were really leading edge and working very hard on that took it so for granted that they even thought it wasn't worth mentioning. So the Merit Awards is exactly one of those things where not only do we want people to be aware that there's really good practice out there and that those who could do better, but those who do well, I think we ought to recognize and say, look, that's how it should be done. And you can, and the awards sort of are every year, and you can put them, on your advertisement. And then next year we've got another look. But that was one of the key insights which struck me when we were looking at the entries.
I'm going to indulge myself now and ask a follow-up. How are you going to use those best practices then to sharing them out around the departments who aren't quite so good? Can we channel that or harness that in some way?
Well, I mean, first of all, we kind of put this on our website. And I think that one of the ways of making sure that perm-secs take HR departments more seriously is when what the Commission says about their department actually becomes part of the annual review. So, as I said, as a regulator, we don't actually have any powers to enforce, but we've got pretty strong levers to encourage. And the Commission, we do hold workshops, we hold online events. Yeah. And I also think that you always persuade people by far more by showing them how it could be done. Because the minute you kind of put hard rules down, the energy goes into evading and not quite doing it. But just say, this is the right thing to do, this is what it looks like, and if you do it, we acknowledge it and say, good.
Thank you. Stephen.
Hi, good morning, Baroness. Stephen
Oh,
Head.
please call me Gisela.
Stephen Head from the Crown Prosecution Service section. My own department has had a recruitment problem in terms of recruiting people to our grade, to our profession, because of disparity in pay across the public sector and also other public service bodies. And I'm sure that's replicated throughout the civil service. Does the Commission have any views on how that's going to be impacting upon high-quality applicants in the future?
I think what the Commission can do in those kind of circumstances is make sure we have sufficient data and really work with the Government Chief People Officer that you can actually demonstrate on a very coherent basis on what the impact is. And certainly, whilst I, as a Commissioner, would not want to start to have to argue about which data sets we use, and it really is something which, I think government HR will have to collect. But I think we can draw conclusions and we can comment on what the effects of this are. And slightly straying off line here, I think that probably my hunch is that some of the problems which you experience will become more widely experienced during levelling up, and that may make it even more obvious that it needs to be looked at.
Thank you. And the lady in the front row here. And then there's one at the back, and then Mike. But there was somebody at the back who put their hand up. Okay, put you on the list, Sarah.
Hi, thank you. I'm Giovanna Reid from the Fast Stream section. Thank you for coming to speak to us today. So the question is what do you think the impact of the Declaration of Reform will have on the future recruitment of civil servants?
My impression on looking at the generation of 25s to 40-year-olds, and that's sort of the age of my children, and when I look at that kind of cohort, their decisions of what kind of employment they look for, they do incredibly value whether they think there's social value to what they're doing. They find things like whether companies are environmentally compliant really, really important. And I think we have to make it much clearer that there is a value in public service to attract that next generation. And one of the things, and it may be worth sort of a conversation offline, is when I look at the numbers of fast streamers and how many we retain to stay within the civil service, I think it is something we ought to look at and ask ourselves some questions. And also ask ourselves the question, and it goes back to the continued skills and learning question, ask ourselves the question of, as we bring in with people with very, very specific skills, do we have the mechanisms that those skills then are actually appropriately used?
Thank you. I'm going to go to the back. I think there's somebody else further backwards, but you go first, and then I'm going to come back to the front, and then I'm going to go back to the back, and then we'll go a bit hokey-cokey.
Good morning. Joanna Garmendia from the National Archives. This is mostly a call for advocacy. I'm here.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. This is a call for advocacy. Is there anything that the Civil Service Commission can do to support departments with the pay flexibility business cases? We had one before the pandemic and it had to be withdrawn. We are experiencing a massive exodus of staff, particularly staff with digital skills. Some of them are being headhunted by software companies. Some of them are leaving for better paid jobs. And obviously with fewer Europeans around, we have fewer very good developers and other digital talent, mostly around data jobs. Is there anything you can do to help with the pay flexibility cases? Thank you.
Let me first say something which you haven't asked, which is my kind of curiosity at National Archives. I think it's going to be really interesting when the public inquiry into the response to COVID, the general response, it will be the first inquiry where we will not have paper-based evidence and I am always worried about the collective memory of a nation, and that's why I think the permanent civil service is so incredibly important, because there is a collective memory that goes on. But I'm also a great advocate of the National Archives to ensure that we provide that. But in terms of the pay, I think all the Commission can do is hold up the mirror as to what is happening and be a constant reminder as to, because remember, if we chair a competition, and am I the only one who finds the word competition strange? You know, it's a job application, it's a job interview. But I'll get used to it or get over it. But you see, when we chair these competitions, and if we find that no one is appointable, then we will say so. And that is the key thing. So we have our biggest impact is on holding up the mirror, and that's why to have commissioners who come from the outside, who have experience, who can't get reappointed, so they don't have to seek anyone's favors, is really important. And by the way, we are currently recruiting 4 new commissioners. It's on the Civil Service website, so if anybody's interested, I don't think serving civil servants can apply.
No,
but if you have friends or know people, look at that. But this holding up the mirror, that is our real power.
Thank you. Gentleman at the front.
Thank you very much. Simon Persley from the Fast Room section. One of the recent trends in government recruitment has been an increased reliance on consultants. And obviously part of that has been justified by the pandemic, where there has been a need for sort of swift and specialised knowledge. But I think it's fair to say that for the most part, the increased reliance on consultants has often been linked to sometimes a bit of an ability to find specific skills, and also some pressures around staff counts and head counts, and essentially not giving teams the space to have their own internal candidates that could fill those needs. I remember that Lord Agnew, who used to be Minister at the Cabinet Office and Treasury, justly criticised this reliance as essentially infantilising the civil service. I was wondering whether this is something that the Civil Service Commission would be interested in terms of addressing in the longer term and thinking around how the civil service develops its recruitment strategy.
Yeah, I was aware of what Lord Agnew was doing when I was the lead NED in the Cabinet Office, something I stepped down from when I became the Civil Service Commissioner. And he, I think, always quite rightly challenged it on the basis of saying, is this a response to an emergency because there's a surge of need, in which case it's justified? is it a response to a skills shortage? In which case, you have to ask yourself two questions. One is, why don't we have the skills? In which case, use the temporary fix, but then make sure we acquire the skills. Or is it this kind of skills which we will never have? And I sort of alluded to this, you know, chief medical officer, chief scientific officers will always be outside. And then the third one is sometimes you need the outsider to just deal with, not just dealing with the problem, but also sometimes to take the risk. So I would argue that the use of the Kate Bingham for the vaccine was a classic case where you said, there's a very specific thing. There's a set of circumstances which actually will require some really significant risk-taking as well. And you kind of say, let's see what happens there. But I sort of, at the risk of sort of sounding really pathetic here, I say, the use of consultant, to me, the example is that if a plumber comes into my house, by the time he's fixed the plumbing and leaves the house, I am no wiser about plumbing than I was before. Because I also don't want to, thank you very much. Whenever I have to ring up the IT desk because something happens, I go and say, can you just talk me through what you've done? Because quite frankly, I don't want to have to ring you up again. And I think when the consultants, when they respond to a skills shortage, I think we've got to be much more cleverer in making sure that a skill retains within the system. But that is totally outside the Commission's remit. But again, I think our biggest advantage or power is that we can look at things across Whitehall, across the trends, and then say, look at this is what's happening on the figures.
Thank you. At the back, is there somebody right at the back?
Hi, Gisela. Tebby Markson from Civil Service World.
Where are you?
Hiya.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah, trouble, right at the back.
Some people have raised concerns about your impartiality. I wonder how you'd hope to allay those concerns. And also, you mentioned briefings and anonymous tax and civil servants being counterproductive, and that you felt everyone should speak up. What role do you see for the Commission and yourself in defending civil servants?
Yeah, I mean, the first one, the impartiality question. I'm always slightly amused that there seems to be a presumption that once you've been a politician, you're kind of infected with a virus which you simply cannot shake up for the rest of your life. You know, I entered the House of Lords non-affiliated, and I'm now a proper crossbencher, for which the convener of the crossbenchers requires a year's quarantine period where you show through good conduct that you've shaken off the urge to be party political. I think I've probably shaken off that urge since 2017 when I stepped down. And I think impartiality is something you can never prove, you can only show it in your conduct. But in terms of, you know, when things go wrong, that's I think what the Commission can do, because civil service code complaints in the end come to us. But we have to be really robust and make sure that it is the departments themselves which take responsibility, that this should not happen in their departments. And that, I think, is for us the strongest lever. But if it doesn't work, we're still here. And I'm actually quite serious about the Civil Service Code being something that should not just be sort of said, you know, here you start in the civil service, have a read, and that's it. I think it should be, I think it was Ian Watmore who managed to make sure that awareness of the Civil Service Code got it into the People Survey. And I think there ought to be a continuous of, this is the behavior we expect from all of us at whatever level we are. It's continued awareness of it, I think, is what makes the difference.
Thank you. Rogue question. Could we have the chap behind Mike Buckley, please? And then I'll come to, I don't know, we'll see. I've got limited time now, so I'm just going to have to take snappy questions, please.
Chris Meyer from the Times. I just wanted to follow up your point about the anonymous tax being counterproductive. What do you mean by that? Are you saying it's a risk to civil service impartiality, either by setting up some kind of working from home culture war with ministers on one side and civil servants on the other, or that it will drive away good people because they don't like this culture of working? Could you just amplify a little bit what you meant by counterproductive?
I think the biggest damage it does, it keeps people away from wanting to be involved. You see, when you become a politician, you kind of, you know you've got a public-facing role, you know you're going to get verbal and real, and sometimes, you know, real stuff hurled at you. It is part of the world you have chosen to enter. If you are a civil servant, that is not the world you've chosen to enter. It's much more to the point. It is that you regard yourself as your duty, that you actually provide the advice, which is as impartial as you can be and as robust as you can be. So the minute you take that argument outside, I think you have a problem. I remember when I first became a minister, meeting my private office and saying, behind these doors, we can have some real robust discussions. The minute we're outside those doors, there's only one line to take, and I take it and you take it. And my view always was that if I'd ever got to the point that I would find, whatever happened behind those closed doors, once I was out there, if anything had gone wrong, it was me. Now, I know you can't always do that, but in terms of the basic principle, just as Cabinet has collective responsibility, I think that's what you have to do. And also, quite frankly, if you think there is a fault there, then what are you going to do about it? But this is not a new problem. I think this is something that has been, it was ever thus, and we just have to keep saying, don't do it. Because the greatest danger is you keep good people who want to enter public service, you keep them out. And that would be a mistake.
Thank you.
Gisela, can I just...
Hang on.
Can I just ask a follow-up to that? Is there anything the Commission can do? I mean, it's really welcome you saying that publicly. It's such a big issue. We get more feedback on this point than any other, including pay, in terms of how civil servants feel about it. And I also wonder, you know, both in terms of saying something publicly, which is welcome, and what the Commission can do going on, whether there's any way of the Commission measuring what the impact of that is, whether it is actually putting off people applying. You know, is there any way of kind of evidencing to ministers what the impact of that conduct actually has?
Measuring the negative is, you know, measuring an absence is always a real problem. But I take that challenge with me, and let me think about it. I also have to say, there is a problem as to the public perception of a civil servant. I still find it very difficult for them for people to fully understand just the range of really difficult things you do, which go beyond the Jim Hacker, the Machiavelli, and the thick of it, which is why it's, you know, incredibly entertaining and in some areas incredibly enduring. It is hard to have that image, and I do wonder whether we shouldn't do more, as to almost say, you know, here are 20 different people, civil servants at work, and they do so many different things. And that's probably something collectively we ought to think about.
Thank you. We have run out of time, unless, do you want to carry on a bit? Giz, have you got extra time to answer a couple more questions from members, maybe?
Now, let's put it that way. This is usually your final downfall. You sort of take an extra question. That's the one which goes down. So only understanding that you're gentle on me, I'll take it.
Okay, but Sarah, you had your hand up, so Sarah, can we give the microphone to Sarah, please? She had her hand. No, Sarah's waving at you. She has had her hand up a number of times. So
thank you.
Snappy.
Thank you, Gisela. Snappy request, please. As part of that overcoming public perception of civil servants as Jim Hacker, thick of it, please can everyone stop using the word Whitehall? Most of us aren't in Whitehall. We could use central government, we can use service delivery, we can reflect and include everybody here who works in different parts of the country, which speaks to the levelling up agenda too. Thank you.
more of a statement.
Point taken.
Thank you. I do think we've had you for 45 minutes. If it's all right, we'll finish there. There are still some questions, and I'm really sorry that people haven't had a chance to ask them. And I felt at one stage as if I'd walked into a press conference rather than a union conference, but we'll not dwell on that. Thank you very, very much indeed. Really enjoyed what you said, and I am old enough to remember the 1973-74 fuel crisis, the power cuts and the candles, so that's maybe not a claim to fame, but I really enjoyed what you said, and I think everybody else has. Thank you for being so open, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.